Our next speaker is Irene Dickinson. Irene? Okay, great. She's from the Arizona Monarch Collaborative, Desert Botanical Garden. Her talk is on monarch conservation in Arizona. Irene is originally from northern Nevada and grew up exploring the northern deserts. She got her degree from Cal Poly Humboldt in zoology with a minor in studio art. She's lived all over the country doing a variety of insect work, from research farms in upstate New York to the Audubon Insectarium in New Orleans. She now lives in Tucson and works as the Arizona Monarch Collaborative coordinator. She enjoys going for hikes and photographing every creature she can, and while she's here at the conference, she hopes to see any and all animals. Welcome, Irene.
So I'm Irene, and I'm the Arizona Monarch Collaborative coordinator, and I'm going to talk to you why monarchs are so unique in Arizona and why we should conserve them along with many other pollinators in the state and in the country. So I'm really hoping everyone knows what a monarch is. Just in case, we have a visual example. Monarchs only lay on milkweed, which is why they're so connected, and they're very iconic and beautiful. So now the next question is, why do we work with monarchs? Monarchs are an easily accessible species that most people will recognize, and they're easy for anyone to participate in their conservation and do their part in helping. They're also a gateway bug, I love that term, to many other pollinators and less loved insects and invertebrates that need just as much help as the other ones do. They're also one of the few insects that we can get reliable annual counts and data on that we can track their status because of their overwintering habit. They're also an indicator species because the threats they face is very similar to many other pollinators and insects around the country and the world. So monarchs in the US. Monarchs are not divided into separate populations. A lot of people will use that word. It's kind of generally a case of semantics, but they're not populations because they are all genetically the same. So I'm going to use the word flyways or groups. So the monarchs east of the Rockies, those ones tend to migrate to Mexico, central Mexico forests, and the ones west of the Rockies will migrate to California, Southern California forests. So talk about some depressing things. Western monarchs are a little bit more in trouble than the Eastern monarchs. They used to be numbered in the millions in the 80s and 90s. And in around, I think the most recent low numbers were in 2020, less than 2,000 individuals were counted in the overwintering groves by the Xerces Society Thanksgiving counts. That's pretty depressing. Last year, the counts were a little bit better at 233,000. Now on to Arizona monarchs. Monarchs in Arizona are pretty cool because they live in the state year-round. In the off-season, so off-season here being now, during the hot summer months, they are generally found in the higher elevation areas and up north around Flagstaff. During the cooler months, during the winter, they like to hang out in Phoenix and Tucson like the snowbirds. And they also overwinter and breed in the southern part of the state. And through efforts done by Southwest Monarch Study, through tagging, we have also found that monarchs in Arizona migrate to both Mexico and Canada. It makes it kind of a in-between spot for them. Without milkweed, we don't have monarchs, and Arizona has plenty of milkweed. It's about over 30 described species, definitely more. Some are more common than others. There is about the highest diversity of milkweeds in the state, and they range from the traditional riparian areas where they're found to sandy dunes to high plateau, high elevation areas. And they're also very important for nectar plants for not just monarchs, but for many different pollinators. Now, more depressing things. Like many different animals across the world, monarchs are facing the same threats as they are in Arizona. One of the familiar threats, climate change. So increased temperatures is a big factor, especially here in Arizona. I believe a couple years ago, Phoenix had around 50 days over 110. Don't quote me on that, but that's not very comfortable for anyone. Monarchs have been seen to tolerate temperatures between 106 and 104 degrees, but I don't think that's comfortable for them either. And of course, with the ever rising temperatures comes drought and fires. Fires are not a very normal part of the lower desert ecosystem, and they're caused by a lot of invasive grasses, and that in turn has a lot of habitat destruction. And habitat destruction also comes from encroachment by expansion of people's stuff. So Phoenix is one of the fastest growing cities in the country, and a lot of that expansion gets into important monarch habitat. And believe it or not, there is farming in Arizona. Out Yuma is, I think, the biggest lettuce producer in the country. And then in Green Valley, you'll see pecans, and a little north in Marana, you'll see cotton. It's kind of insane. And of course, all those agricultural areas use heavy pesticides, and from those pesticides will drift onto milkweed and unfortunately harm many monarchs and other pollinators. No, I promise you can help and do things. So a lot of really good ways to help. One being plant native nectar plants, native being the key word, although sometimes planting non-native is still helpful. Planting milkweed, of course, is very vital for monarchs. And advocate for habitat is something I really like to emphasize. I know a lot of HOAs around the country are very sterile with their landscaping and use pesticides, and not very nice for pollinators. I think talking directly with HOAs about replacing those plants with more beneficial plants is a really good way to advocate for habitat. And of course, reduce pesticide use or eliminate it entirely. I know most people don't necessarily need pesticides in their backyard. It's easy just to pull those weeds. And participate in citizen science, I think, is one of the most important ways to gather important data on pollinators and monarchs. So there's both a lot of local and national citizen science initiatives. There's Journey North, monarchwatch.org. Their observations are collected throughout the country. And then the more regional ones we have are Desert Refuge, and they're seeking to figure out when monarchs are breeding during the winter in Arizona and what life stage they're hanging out in during the winter. And another local initiative is Southwest Monarch Study, and they focus on tagging monarchs with the fun stickers that I think is crazy, because the only way you can tell where they went is have volunteers looking for the butterflies with the stickers. Now on to the collaborative. Arizona Monarch Collaborative is a big group of a lot of different organizations, from nonprofits, state, federal, and tribal representatives. And it was formed in response to the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Monarch Conservation Plan and more regional efforts. And it is run by 4 different volunteer steering committees, including the main 4 volunteer committees, including the steering committee. So the first steering committee is the Research, Information, and Monitoring Committee. This committee is dedicated to identifying sources of monarch data in Arizona and improve the understanding of monarch movement in the state. Also working on developing recommendations for community science initiatives and determining the timing of monarch movement and activity throughout Arizona. They're also working on encouraging BMPs, best management practices for grazing and on ag lands. And then we have the Restoration and Plant Materials Committees. Their goals are working on creating a list of native plant vendors creating a statewide map of existing pollinator habitat and restoration project sites, and developing techniques and protocols to improve restoration efforts and improve seed availability, as well as encourage landowners to incorporate pollinator habitat into their activities. Now, I like to say this committee is the key committee to working everything, because without this committee, we wouldn't have the numbers of people in our group. And obviously, it's a lot of outreach in this committee, and their goals are creating outreach strategies for all different communities and making user-friendly resources that are inclusive to these communities. And creation of pollinator gardens in public areas, and also helping to use these pollinator gardens to help raise public awareness. And also more encouraging landowners and land managers to help protect these priority areas and compile existing best management practices, and using model habitat as examples for these priority areas. So our current project is working on our statewide voluntary conservation plan. It's another activity inspired by the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies plan. That plan was specifically orchestrated for Western monarchs, but our plan is orchestrated for specific Arizona conservation strategies. We're working on using this to promote and share these strategies for the monarch's entire life cycle and achieve a vision of a viable population or group of monarchs in this state. So ultimately, monarch conservation is definitely not isolated, and conservation for monarchs is conservation for many different organisms, including the lesser loved animals that definitely deserve just as much attention as monarchs do. By preserving monarchs, we can also work to preserve the habitats of these other animals. And there's I ran a little short. Also, if anyone is local to Arizona, we are having our in-person meeting at the Desert Botanical Garden on August 20th. And you can check out our website for more information on that.
Hi, Irene. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. Non-native milkweed. This is a question we get asked probably most frequently in the Butterfly Pavilion. And I know the information changes from month to month, it seems.
Yeah.
So what is your... We've been telling people it's okay, we prefer native, but if you have it already, just make sure you cut it down in the fall, or is that still the messaging?
So Butterfly Pavilion's in Colorado, right?
In the Butterfly Pavilion in LA. So
in LA.
Yeah. So
Okay.
we do tell people plant California natives, but a lot of people have already planted non-native, or that's the only thing they can find. So.
Yeah. So for places that it freezes during the winter, having milkweed like tropical milkweed isn't as big as a deal because it will kill the OE, the virus that impacts monarchs. In places that it's warm year-round, like LA, I think it's probably generally discouraged, although tropical milkweed specifically ranges in like very northern Mexico. So here, specifically in Arizona, it's not as big of a deal because it's close enough to its native habitat, but I think in LA it would be a little bit of a gamble because that's not as native. But generally encouraging native is good, but in your case, I think it's not a huge deal to have non-native.
We have a question from virtual. Oh, you need the microphone.
This is a comment post from Sebs online. If people want to hop into the community science stuff, this very weekend is the International Monarch Monitoring Blitz.
Yes.
All you have to do to participate is post monarch observations to their iNaturalist project. So
Good shout out.
Excellent. Anyone? There's one.
I would like to see a really clear graphic or description of which groups migrate and which groups don't, and which ones go where, because I'm up in southern Alberta, where supposedly we have monarchs, but not very often. And I often teach about them and talk about, 3 generations up, 1 generation down. But I would like, some of this information was new to me in terms of where other groups migrate. Can you go back to that graphic and just describe it again? And then maybe
power.
point to somewhere online that I can take some more time to study that.
Okay, I'll talk to you about it afterwards.
Okay.
But I can say that monarch movement is difficult to understand, the direct movement, because we're just relying on people looking for stickers at the overwintering sites. There is, I think Scott talked about it during his talk, there's new radio technology, little tiny trackers that are coming out that are being tested on monarchs. So hopefully that will get us a clearer picture of exactly what groups are going where. But it is still kind of little is understood about it.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.